I'm Kerry Peters, a recognized thought leader in the Microsoft Dynamics community and a Microsoft MVP for business applications. Welcome to the Get Your New View podcast. Keep listening to learn how we work with frustrated Business Central and NAV users who struggle to use their system and find the answers that they need. We teach them to truly understand how the system can support their business processes to make immediate and lasting improvements. As a result, they get more done in less time, make better business decisions, and even love their system. In this next season of the Get Your New View podcast, I'd like you to meet even more members of our New View team who have brought examples of their favorite projects they've worked on with our customers to create efficiencies, utilize automation, and simply use even more of the features of their Business Central software.
Hello everyone, this is Mark Rhodes, and today we're talking to Kerry Peters about one of her favorite topics, dimensions. You probably thought I was going to say bees or ducks or something like that, but no, we're going to talk about dimensions today. We're going to keep it system related. Hi Kerry.
Hi Mark, how are you today?
We can talk about bees and ducks if we've got time, but let's focus on dimensions first.
Fantastic.
And before we dive in, I think just about everyone at least has a little bit of familiarity with dimensions if they're not using some, but I think the vast majority of folks are using just a couple, don't understand really how they drive insights and what they do inside the system. Let's start with just a quick definition, get everybody on the same page. What are dimensions in Business Central and NAV?
Yeah, that's a great question. So dimensions, we can make them as complicated as we want, but let's be super simple. Dimensions are data tags that go into the system with your financial transactions for the purpose of reporting. So every time you post a transaction in the system, if you're using dimensions, a little bit of additional information is going along with that so that when you report against your results, you can get really good, robust financial reporting based off of all of those data tags that you're collecting.
Beautiful. If everybody knows when you really understand a subject, you can explain it very, very simply. And Kerry just did that. That was a beautiful explanation. And so here's another big misperception. You can have, what, 2 dimensions, 3 in Business Central?
You can have as many dimensions as you can think of. So that's not always a good thing. We can go overboard, right? But we have lots of people who aren't using dimensions at all or feel like they're limited to only 2. And that's absolutely not the case. You can have as many dimensions as are useful to your company. And I always tell people to focus on what is useful from a financial reporting standpoint. When you look at things from the viewpoint of financial results, how do you talk about things in your organization? Do you talk about your customers? Do you talk about your items? Do you focus on margin? What are those things that you need to know about your financial performance in order to understand how to run that business in the future?
Yes, excellent. At the risk of overgeneralizing, what's an average number of dimensions for a business? Just to provide the folks watching some sort of benchmark to say, okay, we do have more than 2. It's not too far off that number. So, hey, we're not doing too bad at least, right?
Yep. I'm going to say, I'll give you a range instead of an average. How about 4 to 12? So once we get past that, 10 or 12, then we get to the point where we just really can't track with that many different factors anymore. And that 4 really allows us to get a little bit more in depth with things where the minimum of 2 doesn't seem to get us very far. So my coworkers used to joke that I always had 8 dimensions with every implementation, and I had to pull some statistics to show them that it wasn't true. And as I pulled those statistics, that's what fell within that range, is about 4 to 12.
How about that?
Yeah.
How about that? I bet a lot of folks are watching who don't feel like they're real comfortable or really unpacking the power of dimensions have gotten the couple of the standard ones that they got set up during an initial implementation, probably have never looked at it again. Is that what you typically run against?
Oh my gosh, that happens all the time. And I brought a story to tell about one of my customers. Yeah, so Sue was a controller who had inherited a system just like you were mentioning. And this happens with lots of folks, right? So we have a new job or a new position and somebody else has designed the system and we get to figure out how to make those numbers sing with something that somebody else has created. And what she had to work with is she had two dimensions and they were using department and project. So because they had departments, they had great reporting on what was happening with their budgets and what was happening with the different departments and how they were managing their money. So that was good. They didn't really use project, but she was having to do a whole ton of manual manipulation of data to answer other questions about what was happening with their customers. So who were buying things from them and what were those customers buying. And she was hand calculating margin on almost everything because that was their primary discussion in their organization. Is what is our margin when we look at our financial statements? And perfectly reasonable. I would love everybody to be talking about margin. But as we sat down and talked about what was possible with her financial reports and how she would get there, we started to examine what dimensions could do for her. So we talked about how they would answer a key question, and that key question for them is who is buying what? It's really a simple question, but they could not get to that answer in any way, shape, or form with their financial reporting before because all they had to work with was department and project. So they could get a view into what was happening with operating expenses, but they had no view into what the breakdown was of their revenue or their cost of goods. And of course, since those two things work together into their margin, we needed to figure that out for them. So what we did is we sat down and did a workshop with them. So, and Sue was the key person, but she brought in people from her sales team and her budget managers and the executive team.
Nice.
And we talked through, what is it that you would like to get out of financial reports that you're not getting today? And there was a pretty long list. And the cool thing about that kind of long list was there were really clear themes that came out of it. And it was, as Sue had expected, they just wanted to know what was happening with their customers and with the items that they were buying and understand the behavior that was happening. So they put together one additional dimension for a customer grouping. They had a pretty long list, so they needed to group them into kind of subsets. And then they also put in a dimension for brand. And immediately, once they started gathering that data, they had great reports to say of our brands, which customers are buying this. And out of those brands, which are the leaders in that list, and which customers are really buying the high margin things or the low margin things. So they started to have, of course, those discussions that they wanted to have about margin. And it was so interesting. We had a follow-up meeting with them as they started to look on those reports just to tweak things and see what else they wanted. And the insights that the executive team was able to pull out of that immediately once they had that data, where they were able to confirm, well, I always thought that this person was buying a lot, but when I look at it, it's all the stuff where it's almost no margin. So they had a lot of volume with almost no margin from a customer that they were giving a lot of attention to. Right. So they were able to have some good discussions about where they should be directing their energy and some really good reality checks on what was actually happening once they had the data in front of them.
I got to pause right here for that. The point you just made is just so powerful. It's hard enough to see all the time you're wasting just driving those financial reports, right? Yep. But that's generally more self-contained within the finance department. But what you just said is not only were they wasting time there, they're wasting time throughout the entire organization. That's huge.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep, absolutely. And one of the other things that came out of that discussion is that they had a focus on region with things, and they had different regional behavior. So after they looked at this first set, they added another dimension, which was region, because each of their customers were in a certain part of the country. And once they added that, they were able to go a whole layer deeper to see what kind of seasonality over time was happening with the things that their customers were buying in those different regions, really showing different behavior. And then they could change their marketing marketing efforts. So their marketing department sat in on those meetings and got super excited because they could see exactly when they should be advertising certain things, and not just across the country with the same treatment, that it needed to be truly different to be more impactful.
That's the very definition of work smarter, not harder, if I've ever heard one. That's amazing.
Yeah. No, I absolutely love that project. There was a lot of good that came out of that. And honestly, Sue came out of it looking like a hero. So she had initiated the whole conversation. She knew something else needed to happen, and she was present with all of those meetings and really kept things on task for their goals. And then she learned about account schedules and dimensions and how they work together as we went. So she was able to continue to innovate after we had helped them to get started.
Yeah. The other, so many powerful morals coming out of that one is, well, just the fact that your business changes over time, right? So don't get locked into this mindset that you have to keep looking at the same numbers and the same ratios and the same views and all the same reports, right? That should grow over time too. And well, you can add dimensions and change those over time, can't you?
Absolutely. And you and I have talked about this. I have a personal theory about change with organizations, that an organization will change significantly about every 5 years. That the things that you're doing now are going to be very, very different from what they were 5 years ago.
Right.
And that really shows in your financial results. So even if your company had dimensions set up 5 years ago, you're going to get on down the road and there's a couple of those that you just won't use anymore. And they might still be incorporated in your financial reports, but you've moved on talking about other things. So having a continued conversation, and I encourage people to do this every year, to take a look. Are our financial reports still relevant? Are the things that we're measuring making a difference? Do we have new things that we wish we were measuring more? You absolutely can incorporate those at any time and start to gather new insights. And it's very easy to leave those older things behind, or combine those new things with the olds to get a different vision of what's happening.
In my experience, and I'll throw this out here, but in my experience, especially with financial reports, you get so locked into comparing last year. And I think that drives a mindset that it's got to be steady. It's always got to look the same so you can drive those comparisons. And you just got to break free of that.
Right. Yeah. The comparisons are useful in some parts, but I think that those longer and longer financial timeframes become more and more irrelevant the faster we all change. So it used to be quite frequently 10, 15 years ago, we might look at something over a 10-year window. Now, nobody does that. I don't think anybody goes past a couple of years anymore because it just doesn't matter because it's so different. So making decisions on a longer time frame doesn't really help us anymore.
And I just got to say too, I love that they all got into the room and had those group conversations, driving that commitment, the buy-in, the shared understanding of what was going on. What a completely different set of conversations they're having now in terms of analyzing their business and performance and where they should be spending time and seeking higher ROIs. Incredible.
Yeah.
Really incredible.
No, and it was neat too, seeing those other departments gain that understanding of what could be measured and how it could be used. This is something I hadn't thought about earlier, but somebody in their production department came back to Sue later and asked her if they could incorporate a dimension. And she was a little surprised. She wasn't sure that person was really paying attention to what dimensions were. And, she kind of questioned them, like, well, why did they think a dimension would do that? And what they were doing is they were hiring a bunch of outside people to do kind of subcontracting work for them. And they wanted to get an idea of what it was costing them to pay those subcontractors of different types. And would it make sense for them to bring a position in-house to do that instead of hiring people outside? So they had a dimension that was called something like task. And they assigned these different things they had to the subcontractors, and they were able to evaluate very quickly whether they should continue using contractors outside or whether they had enough volume to bring somebody in-house where they could pay them as a full-time employee instead.
Yeah, new capabilities, didn't even think about that. That's beautiful to save money. And
that's something the finance department never really would have seen or thought about because they weren't in the details of that other department. So that other department brought that to finance and said, can we get this? And she said, well, absolutely, let's do it.
It's beautiful ownership.
Yeah.
So we talk about the business change and how many companies actually go back and check against the first two dimensions that got set up with your implementation and reevaluate that. I see a lot of that with chart of accounts too, right? You get locked into this, you set up the chart of accounts, and that would have been 10, 15 years ago, perhaps, if you're installing on, say, NAV 2009, right? And how few companies ever go back and reevaluate that? I think you get locked in again with, well, it's structured, we have to keep it, because that's the only way the financial system can maintain integrity. And I don't know what it is. A lot of companies never really reconsider their chart of accounts. Is that right?
Yeah, it's true. And one of my absolute favorite projects with dimensions in particular is when we catch people at just that right spot where either they're doing a new implementation, so maybe they're coming onto Business Central from some other system for the first time, or maybe it's time for a re-implementation if they're using an older version of NAV, or maybe they've had such structural changes in their organization, maybe they've been involved in an acquisition, that kind of thing, that they kind of, it's time for that do-over. So having time with people at that particular point is just a golden opportunity. I always tell people it's a golden opportunity for you to clean up that chart of accounts, but also to clean up and clarify what's happening with your posting groups and to incorporate dimensions. So those three things really go hand in hand, and the ability to expand your capabilities while streamlining what you have in the system is very unique. So I love being able to work with folks who can do that kind of thing when they have that new opportunity.
Yeah. I've always thought it visually as it doesn't have to be yards deep. It can be much shorter and a little wider.
Yep. Absolutely. And when I think about how to explain dimensions used to be a very straight line thing. So they were, segments of an account, and you'd have this structure that would stick you there. Now, when we think about how we structure dimensions with accounting, we've got our natural account, and you can really have this whole universe of dimensions around that where you can pick and choose and combine, and there doesn't really have to be any kind of particular hierarchy to it at all. It's much more loosely organized, but it can really focus our attention on what we need to do by putting together those different combinations.
Yeah, fantastic. So yes, upgrades, re-implementations, that's a good trigger point to reconsider a lot of these elements in the system.
Yep. Yeah. Another example I can think about, Mark, is my friend Bill, who is a governmental accountant. So he had recently implemented Business Central, and he already knew what he needed to do with the financial reports and didn't need a whole lot of guidance with that. But we were sitting down and kind of talking about what his plan was for the year. And he said, once a month I lock myself in my office. And this was 100% true. He'd lock himself in his office, block his calendar, because he had this particular regulatory report that he had to produce, which justified their use of funds. And it was critically important, and they had all of these government codes. They had 3 sets of different codes that they had to break down their income statement. It was almost like having a different set of books that he was producing. So we talked about how he could use dimensions for that, and we realized that it absolutely was really rule-based, where we knew which parts of their income statement we'd be assigned to these codes. So we set up dimensions for all of those different things. He was able to produce his first set in 1 day instead of a whole month of all that manual manipulation, because it was 100% out of the system.
He was taking a month to do that. I didn't catch that up front. I thought it was like a day a month maybe, which is still a lot. But
yeah, it was an annual thing, and it was a very big deal. All of their funding depended on it, so it was high stakes. And he had no way to do that other than this string of Excel spreadsheets. So it took us a little while to design it, to put it together. But once it was designed, 1 day. He said he spent about 3 days reviewing it to make sure that it was right, and he couldn't find anything wrong with it. So that was just a cool story.
That's insane.
I don't think I haven't even calculated the numbers on that, and I probably should. But if you think about what it cost him, right? He was the VP of finance with his company. What it cost him to do that for a month. while he was not available to do other things. And
that's exactly what I'm thinking, right?
Yeah. And everything was in his system. So if he needed to check something or audit it, he could go back and look at that. He didn't have to go find what this year's version was or last year's version or whatever worksheet supported that.
Goodness. I guess he never had his computer go blue screen to death or anything like that, thank goodness, in the middle of it, right? My goodness.
Yeah, and I imagine he probably had a corrupt spreadsheet in there at some point. We all do. Yeah. All that kind of stuff that's super frustrating, but you see why I get so excited about this for people.
Yeah, no doubt. And so this was the CFO that was doing this, locked himself away in the office for a month a year, right? Mm-hmm. All right, so that's a pretty obvious example where he's spending an awful lot of time on things he really shouldn't be, right? Yep. But for the average, quote unquote, average BC NAV customer, right, they're not doing that, but I guarantee most are spending time where they shouldn't be. And spending time on non-value activities is really what it comes down to, right? And so how does the average customer identify where they're wasting that time and where it could be deployed better? Because you get kind of used to the routine, right?
Yeah, you sure do. So I always ask them to do a little bit of a time study related to their financial reporting that they do at the end of the month. So the month-end close is going to take a certain amount of time, but when you think about the financial reporting and how it breaks down, there's a certain amount of time that we spend for review. There's a certain amount of time that we spend for correction of errors. And then there's a certain amount of time that we spend for production of the financials so that they look nice and consistent and accurate, and we can present it to somebody else for our executive team or the board. So when you think about that, review, correction of errors, and production, you can do a quick time study on that pretty well. And every time I've sat down with somebody to look at how much time it is, they're surprised at how much the accumulated time is for those three activities.
Yeah.
And it's usually something that only they're doing. They're not delegating that. They've already delegated other month-end processes, and people have done their work, and they're delivering that to them. And this is the thing that the controller or the CFO needs to do to finalize that and to make sure that they're aware of what the story is behind all the financial reporting, because they're the ones who are going to be presenting this in some way. So they've got to understand how things fit together and what the variances are. So there's a little bit of study that goes along in that particular time period, but being able to automate those pieces so that we don't have to do so much review because we trust that errors aren't happening because we figured out what the root cause is. We don't have to do as much correction because we provided more automation that's made things more efficient upstream. And certainly what we've talked about today, the production of reports and the incorporation of dimensions so that we have more depth to what we're reporting. That's what really provides the true value here.
I love that I guess it's fair to call it a formula for evaluating what's happening there. I'm such a huge fan of gathering the team together, whether it's just the finance team, gathering representatives from across the country, like we talked about previously, right? And asking about what information do you need that you're not getting? Mm-hmm. Where are we wasting time, right? Just simple, open-ended questions, and just get the team talking, because this stuff just creeps into business over time. It's inevitable. Nothing wrong with it. That's just how it goes. But take advantage of the opportunity, especially with the continued involvement of Business Central and the reporting mechanisms therein, to save yourself an awful lot of manual time that's just embedded in there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. So it's just exciting to see the results that come out of it. And I love seeing when people get to that point of innovation, once they've solved their base problem and they're like, oh, I could solve that with this and this and this, and they keep coming up with new ideas. It's almost endless what they can do.
And just, our company culture and the people on our team, it really warms us very deeply in our soul when we can drive this kind of change for a client. I don't know if you want to just share a little bit about the feeling that you had following these couple couple interventions.
Yeah,
if we want to call
yeah,
them that.
Absolutely.
Just seeing the change that happened, it just had to feel so good.
Yeah, no, this is just fantastic. And I just love hearing back from folks once they've had that success and they've had, other people from their company ask them for things that they can do something about. That feeling of helplessness, I can't do that because we're not gathering that data. That change from, I can't do that, and the disappointment that goes, well, yeah, absolutely, we can do something about that. Let's make that happen for you. That's exciting. And that's what we all want to be able to do in our work, is be able to help other people around us to do better as well.
Love hearing that. A million great stories. We'll come back and talk to about a few others and other podcasts. But Kerry, thank you so much for just sharing there and having that conversation about what's waiting for everyone with a little bit of help and a little bit of insight into Business Central and NAV.
Yep. Happy to talk with you and them about that as well.
Yeah. Everybody, hope you enjoyed this. We've got more stories to share, so keep watching. See you soon.
I'm Kerry Peters. Thank you for tuning in to the Get Your New View podcast. For more episodes like this on YouTube, click the subscribe button and ring the bell to ensure that you get notified whenever new content comes out. If you're listening to the audio podcast, please share an honest review on Apple Podcasts. If you are ready to rethink today for tomorrow, look for the link below and contact us to speak with our expert team. You won't find the level of no-nonsense real-world experience we offer anywhere else, and we're here to put that experience to work for you. Do you think you could use more features of your software if you just knew how? Are you frustrated with inefficiency that never seems to get better? Did your team ever really get good training to understand how to use your business software? Do you suspect there just has to be a better way and you don't know what it is? We believe every company can benefit from increased efficiency and higher utilization of their software, and that it's possible to have fun while learning exactly how to do that. The experts at NewView Strategies work with frustrated Business Central and NAV users who struggle to use their system and find the answers they need. We teach them to truly understand how the system can support their business processes to make immediate and lasting improvements. As a result, they get more done in less time, make better business decisions, and even love their system. Please contact us at getyournewview.com to get started.